And the world today begins right now. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh says his close group is close to what he describes as a truce with Israel, weeks after the war between the two started. But there are reports that Hamas is demanding that Israel stop flying over Gaza for the duration of the truce. A local news source in Gaza says Hamas leader Rin Gaza Yahya Sinwar wants flights suspended over all of Gaza, while another news source says Hamas is seeking to limit flights to 6 hours a day over northern Gaza only. A major part of the Israeli offensive is its air campaign, in which its aircraft have struck thousands of times since the war began after Hamas attacked Israeli communities on October 7th. The international community of the Red Crescent, which has helped to facilitate previous hostage deals, have been meeting Hamas leaders, raising hopes a truce is in the horizon. Speaking of those hostages, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says progress is being made on their release. He was speaking in northern Israel, where he was visiting Israeli soldiers. He told them, "We are currently focusing on a very strong and proactive defense in the north in order to achieve a crushing victory in the south. The first goal, the elimination of Hamas, does not stop until it is done. Second goal, the return of the hostages. We are making progress. I don't think it's worth saying too much, not even at this moment, but I hope there will be good news soon." In the meantime, Mr. Netanyahu says he is convening his war cabinet for a meeting this evening in light of developments related to the release of the abductees. After the cabinet meets at 6 p.m. local time, Mr. Netanyahu has also meetings with his Security Council and his government cabinet this evening. And I want to bring in Professor of History and International Studies at the University of Lagos, David Awarawa. Professor Awarawa, thanks for joining us on the program. Now, let's look at some of the conditions being given by Hamas for this truce to take place. They want Israeli military planes to stop flying over Gaza. That would mean that Israel pauses on the war. Prime Minister Netanyahu has in the past refused this option. Why would he consider it now?
Once again, thank you for having me. The Israeli Prime Minister will consider that now because of the desire to get the hostages released. The truce that is being negotiated, the negotiations are surrounded by a couple of things, and a number of issues are, being discussed. One, Hamas and of course the Palestinians want a pause to this conflict. So many people have died already, 13,000 and counting. And of course, the Israelis want the hostages released. So it's a quid pro quo, actually. One side wanting a pause to the violence, the other side wanting the hostages released. Of course, we just listened to the comments of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying it's optimistic that very soon the hostages will be released. In fact, arrangements are being made to receive them when they are released. That is based on this truce being negotiated, that, of course, Israeli violence has to pause for some time. So they are saying 3 days, 5 days, as the case may be. So that is why Netanyahu is considering that now, because a major objective of Israel is to get the hostages released. And getting them released, there has to be some concession. And the concession is that it has to stop violence. We don't know for how many days they will eventually agree to in the end.
The point is to make sure that hostages are released over the weekend. Hamas claimed Israeli airstrikes killed a hostage they had in one of the hospitals, and Israel has promised to return the hostages alive. Could a truce be interpreted as Israel softening its stance?
Exactly, and it has to be. There is no state or actor that gets everything it wants in a negotiation. In any international negotiation, there has to be, there have to be concessions on both sides. Israel desires that the hostages are released, and of course, it's a major objective. We have seen all the protests, since the war began, in Tel Aviv, in New York, all over the world, demanding that Israel does something to get the hostages released. And so Israel has to, shift grants, and the shifting of grants has to do with, pausing attacks on different parts of Gaza, of course, even also the West Bank, and of course that would be the concession they will grant for the hostages to be released. So it makes sense, and it's in the interest of Israel that takes place, because if the hostages are not released and they are dying one after the other, a backlash will take place even from the Israeli population itself. So it's in the interest of Israel that takes place. And of course, I also think it's in the interest of the Palestinians, because that means that the deaths, which have already, mounted over several weeks, will also, come to a pause, at least for a time.
While we're on the subject, Mr. Aworo, Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest in Gaza, was hit yesterday. Premature babies, luckily, were already evacuated. Some have been taken to Egypt and are being stabilized there. While the cost of the war is the number of human lives lost, should the Israeli government bear full responsibility on these deaths?
The Israeli government will bear some responsibility for the deaths. I say some because in terms of war, we have collateral damage here and there. But Israel hasn't taken enough measures to ensure that such collateral damages do not take place. That is where Israel bears responsibility. In counter-terrorism strategy, you don't throw bombs the way Israel has thrown bombs all over the place, demolishing buildings all over the place. That is not a refined counter-terrorism strategy. The strategy that works is the ones that locates where the terrorists are and takes them out, and limiting civilian population to the barest minimum. That is the one that works. And that is the one that Israel has not adopted. So it bears a lot of, not all responsibility, but a lot of responsibility for the huge casualties in this conflict.
So that what you're saying is there's more room to take a bit more responsibility in some respects. My next question to you, Professor, there's countries that are severing ties with Israel because of the humanitarian aspect of the war. And Israel has decided to continue. Would you say the international community has failed once again in its responsibility to stop another war, like it has with the Russia-Ukraine war, and with the UN keeping its mandate of preventing more wars?
Of course, yes. The international community has not been, if it had been successful, this large number of deaths will not be recorded. 13,000 on this side, 1,400 on the other side, 236 hostages. All of that, is pointed to the failure of the international community. But what is the international community? It's the world in microcosm. And so it's the world itself that has failed, including the aggressor states. The aggressor state, and of course, the other group, the non-state actor, because this is an asymmetric war. But of course, in global politics, might is right, and that is what has played out in this conflict. The global community needs to do a lot more. Of course, when we look at the way it is structured, the United Nations is the body that is started with responsibility of promoting international peace and security, and the Security Council is the main body. But the UN itself and the UN Security Council, of course, we know the structure is lopsided. It's not well refined. A structure erected in 1945 is anachronistic in 2023. And until all of those reforms are carried out to ensure that the UN is able to, live up to its responsibility, the global community will continue to fail in conflicts of this nature.
All right. Thank you again, Professor. Appreciate your words on the show.
Thanks so very much.
Thank you. Staying with the war in Gaza, the Red Crescent has released footage of medics preparing prematurely born babies to be transported amid efforts to evacuate the newborns out of the embattled Gaza Strip. In the video, we see the babies being wrapped all together in blankets and then put inside an ambulance. It is unclear where in Gaza this happened and where the babies were evacuated from. 28 prematurely born babies from Gaza's biggest hospital, Shifa, were taken into Egypt for urgent treatment on Monday, where several others died after their incubators were knocked out amid a collapse of medical services during Israel's military assault. And in another development, dozens of Israelis marked Children's Day by protesting outside the offices of the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, in Tel Aviv on Monday evening, pleading the organization help Israeli child hostages in Gaza. Protesters chanted, "Undo your job, UN," and carried placards featuring the faces of child hostages as messages and photos were projected onto the building itself. Israeli comic book artist and protester Ilana Zefrin said she felt the world and Israeli government were ignoring the needs of the hostages.
Everyone is hating Israel right now. A lot of organizations are ignoring or denying what happened to us, and forgetting that before everything else, we're talking about kids and women and old people that are kidnapped in Gaza and are there for like over a month. And we have to go out and pressure it's not only UNICEF, of course, it's our terrible, terrible government that it's not on the top priority. I think every citizen in Israel has to go out and protest until they come home.
And I'm here to fight for all the children and all the kidnapped to come back home now. We can't keep silent. We can't let it be an item on the news. It's our children, it's our families, it's our blood. Not even if we're not related, but we are all one big family. We need to fight for each other.
We'll have more focus on the children in Gaza in just a bit, but the South African government has led a call on the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by mid-December. The call was made by a minister in the presidency, Khumbudzo Chavini, who says if the ICC does not do this, it would signal a total failure of global governance, as the world cannot simply stand by and watch. Israel says it is defending itself following the 7 October attack by Hamas, which saw 1,200 people killed and more than 200 taken hostage. South Africa, along with Bangladesh, Bolivia, Comoros, and Djibouti, submitted a referral to the ICC to investigate whether war crimes and crimes against humanity have been committed in Gaza. Now, the country has announced the withdrawal of its diplomats from Israel and suggested that the position of Israel's ambassador to Pretoria was becoming untenable. Meanwhile, the United Nations says 2/3 of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been made homeless since the beginning of this conflict. According to UN Chief Antonio Guterres, the world is witnessing a killing of civilians that is unparalleled and unprecedented since he became Secretary General in 2017. The UN Humanitarian Office gave an update on Monday, saying another 20,000 Gazans, including increasing numbers of unaccompanied children, journeyed from the north to south, mainly by donkey cart or bus or on foot on Sunday, and some 900,000 displaced people are now in UN shelters.
Seriously ill. 31 premature and low birth weight babies, all of them seriously or critically ill, were successfully evacuated from Al Shifa Hospital in northern Gaza to Emirati Hospital in southern Gaza. Of those 31, 11 or 12 are critically ill, all the others seriously ill. Each of them is either premature or low birth weight. Each of them has serious infections, and quite a few of them have a low body temperature. So they really do need detailed specialist care. Overnight, they received some antibiotics, supportive therapy, oxygen, and we're hoping that that will help stabilize all of them. Today, 28 of the babies were evacuated to Egypt. They were met by a team of 10 neonatal specialists at the border and have now been moved to hospitals in northern Sinai, in Al Arish, and one group of the babies has been brought down to hospitals here in Cairo. So it's great to know that they've got that specialized care. There are 3 babies who weren't transferred today. We don't have the details on why they were not transferred, but we expect to get more information over the next day or 2.
Member states of the United Nations General Assembly are calling for a ceasefire and an increase in aid to Gaza. Israel has ordered the evacuation of the north of Gaza, but thousands of civilians remain without food, fuel, medicines, and water have been running out across the enclave under Israel's 6-week-old siege. In the south, where hundreds of thousands of Gazans who fled the north of the enclave are sheltering, there have been reports of Israeli strikes.
The Kingdom of the Netherlands expresses its gratitude to the Arab group, the OIC, and the PGA. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic, alarming really. Essential services have nearly collapsed, with unimaginable consequences for more than 2 million civilians. To this day, humanitarian access continues to be unsafe, severely limited, and undependable. The aid that enters Gaza is but a fraction of what is required. An immediate and massive scale-up of aid is needed.
Where is the respect for international humanitarian law? How much more death and destruction can one cope with? How many more attacks on schools, hospitals, humanitarian workers, and so on must we witness? The level of suffering in Gaza is unbearable and inhumane. We welcome the UN Security Council resolution adopted last Wednesday. It was long overdue, and a humanitarian ceasefire is now a crucial next step.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic and worsening daily. An immediate humanitarian ceasefire is essential, and we repeat our calls for this, along with an urgent and significant scaling up of humanitarian access and supplies, including food, fuel, water, and medical supplies.
Meeting and commitments are not enough. Resolutions and statements are not enough. It needs to be implemented on the ground. We need concrete action now. We need a humanitarian ceasefire now. We need unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance now.
The lack of food, electricity, water, medicines, and health care is a disaster for the people of Gaza, including for almost 1 million children. The death toll is unbearable. We deplore the continuing denial of humanitarian aid to Gaza, and we call for sufficient, safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access immediately.
The horror must stop. Both in the GA and in the Security Council, the absolute and urgent priority must be to prevent further violence against civilians and halt the widespread destruction of infrastructure. We must also make every effort to avoid a regional spillover, which would likely have repercussions beyond imagination.
Australia wants to see the next steps towards a ceasefire agreed by both parties. We welcome recent reports of diplomatic efforts towards the safe release of hostages and to facilitate safe humanitarian access, and we encourage all steps towards this.
Staying with interventions, the United States also has its expectations high for a possible truce between Israel and Hamas. White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby was addressing the issue during a media briefing earlier.
I just want to let you know we're still working this hour by hour. I do not have an update for you on the hostage deal that we're trying to negotiate. But as you heard the Deputy National Security Advisor say yesterday, we believe we're closer than we've ever been. So we're hopeful. But there's still work to be done, and nothing is done until it's all done. So we're going to keep working on this. We're also working to increase the flow of life-saving humanitarian assistance, food, water, medicine. We're calling for respecting the international law in terms of minimizing the loss of innocent lives. And of course, we're continuing to advocate for humanitarian pauses so that people can get out of harm's way and that aid and assistance can get in. Over the last couple of days, the 18th and the 19th of November, almost 100 trucks carrying humanitarian aid were able to enter Gaza. That brings the total to over 1,260. And then following Israel's announcement that it's allowing fuel now into Gaza to support non-governmental organizations at our strong request, we are now tracking that 6 trucks have crossed down into Gaza with approximately 18,000 gallons of fuel. That will help support food distribution and it will help generators for the hospital so that they can keep working. The total number of U.S. citizens that we've been able to move out of Gaza through that Rafah crossing is now up to 800. We're continuing to work that every day as well.
As for those hostages being held in Gaza, some family members are very disappointed after meeting with members of Israel's war cabinet. As Israel's war in Gaza rages, relatives of the over 240 hostages have been advocating for the Israeli government to get their loved ones back as soon as possible. Thousands of family members recently finished a 5-day march from Tel Aviv to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's house in Jerusalem, where he eventually promised that they could meet with members of Israel's war cabinet this week. One of the attendees, Udi Goren, whose cousin, Tel Haimi, is currently being held by Hamas in Gaza, hoped, according to him, that Israel's government would prioritize the return of the hostages first and foremost.
I went in with one single question, to know if all of the war cabinet supports the same stand that Gantz and Eisenkot took a couple of days ago when they met with us, when they said absolutely clear, without hesitation, that bringing out the hostages is the top priority as far as they're concerned. And now when we've met with the entire cabinet, what we've heard is that taking down Hamas and bringing the hostages are as important, are equally important. As far as I am concerned, and I represent myself and my family, this is incredibly disappointing because I feel that at this point, when we know that taking down Hamas, we keep hearing from them, is going to take months or years, and it's going to take a long time. On the other hand, the other objective is time sensitive. People are dying. We know that for sure. And as the other goal is time sensitive, and we're talking about people's lives, then we all feel, especially when we're talking about our families, that this should be the top priority.
We have to warn, some of the pictures you are about to see may be hard to watch. It is security footage from Israel's South first responders from October 7, and it purportedly shows Hamas gunmen crossing into Israel and chasing people from an outdoor music festival. One of the militants is seen executing a woman at point-blank range. The video shared via South First Responders' official Telegram account shows how people who came from the Nova Festival arrived at the location where the security forces' cameras were in Kibbutz Alamnim, thinking they were safe. The video was posted on Monday. Internally displaced Palestinians today gathered in Rafah to collect flour and other aid being distributed by the United Nations agency, UNRWA. Tagrid Jaber, who came to Rafah from Beit Hanun in the north of Gaza, says her and her family, a total of 13 people, have not been able to find anything more than rice to eat. She said she arrived 20 days ago and has not been able to find flour since, and hopes aid agencies will be providing food and water as summer temperatures fade and winter sets in. She adds that the children are also need clothes and blankets as well as food. Meanwhile, trucks transporting building blocks for a Jordanian field hospital have arrived in Gaza's Khan Yunis, as many hospitals across the Gaza Strip have largely ceased operations. Volunteers were seen setting up the facility, which is said to include 2 hospitals, one for trauma injuries and another to treat premature babies, with 40 incubators. Tens of Palestinian patients have been evacuated late on Monday from Gaza's Indonesian hospital to Al Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Gaza's health ministry said that at least 12 Palestinians were killed and dozens wounded by firing into an Indonesian-built hospital encircled by Israeli tanks, although Israel says it shot back at the fighters who opened fire from inside it. Health officials said 700 patients, along with staff, were under Israeli fire and have denied any fighters were present. The health ministry released a video today showing buses arriving at Al Nasser Hospital and patients being moved into the crowded emergency room.